Now are going to move to our first speaker today, who is Daniel Harris, who Lee mentioned earlier. Daniel, I'm going to welcome you. You're in London at the London Cloth Company. And I'm sorry that we're a bit late, but don't worry, you still have 30 minutes and we will catch up later in the break, the time that we're over. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you? I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely to have you. So take it
hello,
away.
Everybody. Okay, it's very interesting actually in the beginning of the talk where you were mentioning AI, and obviously behind me, this is the original AI. This is the original piece of Industrial Revolution. So today I'm in the studio in London where this is this isn't the big mill. And this is an extension really of the exhibition that we took to Labour of Love in Lille called 100 Jackets. It's something we've been working on, a very long-term project. Behind me, you can just see here. So in the mill, we've always had a uniform for the people that work there because it's such a dirty, grotty job. So we've been making these little work coats, which are normally unlined and very, very simple. And then we thought, we really need people to be seeing this. So just before the pandemic, we were about to launch this exhibition where people could come and see the entire process of manufacturing in one place. So we'd have the weaving, the cutting, cutting, washing, sewing, all confined into what we were going to put into an open-sided shipping container and take it around the country. And then very strangely enough, we got an email from you guys and we're like, oh, we've got this thing, so this is perfect. So yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and a little bit about the mill and how I got into this. So I started the mill. My background is actually in sewing, and then I thought, oh, I can do sewing. Weaving, how hard can it be? And it turns out it's really hard. So I started building, without realizing it, a cloth mill. And what started as one loom has just grown out of control into this sort of sprawling mass of machinery that is continually growing and being restored. We actually have looms now dating from as early as 1870 up until the 1990s. And we weave for all sorts of things. There is, I'll do a little thing later, but there is no normal. We work in fashion, film, and all sorts of things, anything that comes along. Even actually last week, we were working in a residential community for adults with learning difficulties, helping them move a weaving studio. There's all sorts of things that we get involved with. We started off with just using undyed British wool and keeping very, very low mileage, and exactly what you were saying earlier about being able to grow linen, but then not be able to process it very well into yarn in France or whatever. In England, we have an abundance of British wool that really doesn't get used. And so it was very easy for us to start accumulating all that and getting it spun into yarn and then weaving it by comparison, a comparatively low mileage. So if I'll just start with this now. Nope. Yes. Okay. So we use a lot of older machinery, but it actually works very well for us because it's incredibly versatile. So this is the loom that we use the most. This is a sort of 1950s Dobcross loom. And I'm just going to put this on and talk over the top of it. This will just give you a better impression of what the mill looks like these days. So everything in the mill is entirely done by hand. There is no automatic procedures other than, the looms are semi-automatic, but compared to a modern state-of-the-art mill, it's absolutely nothing like that. Weaving is actually, talking of AI, is one of those things where they do think that computers will be able to take over the weaving to a point. Now Dornier in Germany make looms, send them all over the world, and they're actually connected back to the factory. So if there's a problem with the loom in England, it is reset from Germany, which is amazing. but there's still, with weaving, there is still a hand element to it, even in the most state-of-the-art environments. So you can see by the looms that we're using here, there's a lot of handwork involved, and it's considerably slower. One thing that we've done since the very beginning is the fabric is as perfect as we want it to be. We don't go to extreme lengths to, if there are any faults, we will darn them to an extent, but we will leave them in. The imperfections in the fabric and in the yarn are what makes it something that comes from us. So you can see here, we've got a variety of different looms. The one in the foreground is actually from the 1970s. These three are all sort of, they actually made this loom from 1897 to 1972, practically without changing it. It was that perfect. And we'll skip ahead a little bit because I know we're short on time. Actually, you can just see there on the end of that one runs on punch cards, whereas all the other looms are, right. So this is several years ago in East London where we started. This was the first power loom to be running in London for over 100 years. And we started off making very straightforward, what you'd expect, sort of woolens, selling to brands, that sort of thing, but predominantly using as much as possible undyed British wool. So we would go directly to a farm, have a nice chat with them, and we would buy wool according to the shade we wanted. Now, the huge advantage is obviously if you've got cream wool and you've got a black or a brown, you can blend any color you like of monochrome. So going into mainly menswear. And for example, this one here, the cream is a Portland sheep, the black is Black Rock Mountain, and the brown is Manx, which comes from the Isle of Man. So those have been completely unblended. I could tell you exactly which farm they came from and who owned them, where it was spun, who wove it, and who washed it. It got so to a point where we actually we now have our own sheep. We've got about 300 and I think 20, something like that. And I've got to be completely honest, I don't have an awful lot to do with them. I can't name them all by name, but they're mainly Rylands, which is a traditional sheep from Herefordshire, where we are. And then what started off as just one loom quickly grew, and we started working with a lot of brands, a lot of companies coming to us, and we've worked on all sorts of things. This is just some of them, mainly sort of fashion and menswear. But we had this sort of little problem. So this is one of the very early looms that we started off with. And you can see it's very narrow. It actually doesn't have an electric motor on it. It's pedal powered. And this is a tartan that we did for Tiger of Sweden quite some years ago. That's it as the finished garment. And this is great for weaving tartan, but the drawback is it's ever so narrow. So, but we were doing okay. This is actually something we did for Ralph Lauren. Something we got into very early on is other naturally dyed yarns. So we're one of the few people in the UK that works heavily with indigo dyes. So this waistcoat, this is a cotton indigo dyed warp with a Shetland British wool weft, and again more indigo, and it's gone all over the world. Something we didn't expect was the number of footwear companies that would come to us. This was not something I ever saw coming. I didn't realize, but apparently when you make shoes, it's very easy. You can just mount it on whatever you want and off you go. So this was a collaboration we did with Doc Martens, and obviously the big one was with Nike. We did three shoes with them, and that was a tremendous amount. Like, I think it took about 3 years for that to come into culmination, but it's all done with naturally dyed indigo. So the thing is with the mill, especially over the last 3 years, we changed our focus very much from working with fashion companies. We do a lot more education these days, and there is no normal. There really isn't. So we can be going from working with a fashion company to working on a film to actually what we've got here. This is this is some space yarn that we've been recently working with. So we got approached by somebody we know who was working with MIT, and they're trying to make some sort of magnetic fabric that can be used with electromagnets to go and be trialed on the space station. And obviously it's not actually that difficult. They had this wonderful yarn. It's not a wire. Imagine you got metal and cut it into tiny, tiny, tiny hairs like wire wool, and then spun it in the conventional style. So you end up with this ridiculously heavy, but very, very fine, 100% ferrous yarn. So the huge advantage with the looms that we've got is they're incredibly unfussy. They will do most things, but if you just tweak them a little bit, they'll do it pretty well. And so whereas if we'd taken this yarn and tried to put it on a contemporary modern loom, it simply would have just not worked. It would have probably not only destroyed most of the yarn, it could have done some pretty serious damage to the loom as well. We were able to do a first sample with this within about 25 minutes because the looms are just so unfussy. So the whole concept of this is, I'll just skip to the next one. This is actually the fabric we wove. So this is a multi-layered fabric, which is stitched together. You can see the lines running through it. That's the stitching lines that it stitches itself together, essentially. I'll just play that again. And this is so that if you're in space and you need to stick to something, you can switch it on and you will become magnetic. So there would be panels of this built into trousers and overalls and things like that, and about the place. So if you're outside fixing the quantum carburetor, you don't float off into space or whatever. So this obviously is about as bonkers as it gets. And then all sorts of other things have come along over the years. We've done a lot of art pieces for where, again, because the looms have very little electronic elements to them, you can actually set them on weaving, and then we got syringes and injected dye directly into the warp, which is the lengthways yarn, whilst it's on the loom, and then just weave it wet. So you get this incredible irregular, but yet slightly regular pattern coming through the loom, which if it is damp, it bleeds, and you end up with these wonderful patterns. This was slightly different. Obviously, we all know about ICAT. It's a time-honored, hundreds of years of development, a lifetime to learn how to do it properly, or you can do it the way we did it, which is literally discount warehouse ICAT, where we stretched it out in a car park and just used anything that we had to hand. So cling film, cable ties, a bit of Vaseline, everything. We just tried everything, and it seems to work. The huge advantage that we have as well is you can spend a lot of time on the setup for something like this, but then when it comes to the weaving, because we're not hand weaving it, we can put it onto one of the power looms and weave it relatively quickly. This is actually that being set up in our car park. So all we did is we wound the warp, stretched it across, dyed it by hand, left it overnight, and then tried to wind it back on. It was, yeah, it works. There's some of the wet weaving. And yeah, so how did this happen? At the moment, we're up to about 55 tons of machinery, and it started off with this. So how did we get from this to where we are now? Incidentally, if anyone is watching this, this is not how you should go about building a cloth mill. We know we've learned all the wrong ways to do it. So this is me some time ago, and I thought, okay, what do I need to do weaving? Surely all I need is a loom, that'll do. So I knew that obviously I couldn't start with something that is brand new, very expensive, very complicated. So I did a little bit of research and found that you can get these. This is actually a very similar loom to the ones that they used to use to weave Harris tweed. And so I got one of those. And within about a year, I ended up with this little setup here. And the thing that you don't realize with weaving is, you don't just need a loom, you need a warping mill and a winder and a creel, and then you're weaving all this fabric. So you need a machine just to wind up all the fabric for you. And it quickly gets out of hand. And so about a couple of years later, we got this space and went about filling that with even more bits of machinery. And I think I mentioned earlier that the looms that we had were very narrow. They were like this. So all fabric from about 1810 up to about 1840-ish would be narrow, what's called today single width. And it's only over time that we got more intelligent and looms got better and manufacturing got better that the fabric got wider. And so we had this problem that we're stuck with these little narrow looms. So we realized we needed one of these because commercially, single width fabric isn't actually, it's not very efficient, and it's also works out way more, well, because it's inefficient, it works out way more expensive. So we thought, okay, we need one of these. Okay. And it is what's called a Hutchinson-Hollingsworth double-cross loom. And there would have been thousands of these, hundreds of thousands. You can see here, we normally in a mill, they would number them. And we found numbers going up into the 300s. So this was the one that I got first. And what better thing to do to learn how something works than to completely dismantle it into tiny pieces, which probably wasn't the best thing to do, but it wasn't complete, so it didn't matter. So we brought it back to London in hundreds and hundreds of pieces, put it back together, and then realized that actually quite a lot of it was missing. So that's fine, not a problem. We'll find another one. Found another one. This was in the basement of a swimming pool in a place called Sowerby Bridge. So we got that, brought it back, and off we go. So now we're the only weavers, the first mill in London for about 100 years. Fantastic. And we're weaving double width fabric. Everything's going great. But this space that we had, that I showed you earlier, within about 3 years, it looked like this, and it become completely unworkable. And what we've been doing is accumulating, whereas before we'd have to go out and look for bits of machinery, then now people are coming to us saying, oh, we've got this, we'd love you to take it and restore it. So we found this place and quickly set about filling that with even more machinery. So we were going to mills that had shut down in the late 90s and finding all this equipment and basically pulling it all out, putting it all back to work. Now, this loom that you can see behind me, this is actually this when we got it. So you can see they don't always, I mean, this loom was probably made in about 1880. And this is the one that we brought to Lille. It took about 1.5 years to get it back into a working condition. And then the crazy thing is this loom is the one that we used to weave the fabric for the space station. So yeah, and if we hadn't done this, it would have probably been smashed up. And it's still going on today. So this photograph was literally taken about a week ago. I've just got this one. This is from these two lovely gentlemen on the right here, who were, everybody in weaving is a character. They're all bizarre. So yes, they were very reluctant to see it go, but I got it in the end. So once we'd got the wide looms, we then sort of hit a bit of a problem that although we can weave all this lovely fabric, we can't necessarily weave it quick enough. So that brought us into even further on with our technology and brought us up to the 70s, the 1960s and 70s. So these are the first rapier looms that were really widely available. And this is what all weaving technology is based on today. And the things that made this possible were during the 40s, the developments in plastic, green printed circuit boards, and aluminium. So these, again, by modern standards, are incredibly slow, but they're very versatile. So yeah, so we ended up with these. And they run on punch cards. So the sort of work that we're undertaking these days, we still do a lot of work with fashion, but recently sort of film companies started approaching us for doing very small amounts of bespoke work. So this was something that came out quite recently, actually. You might have seen it on over Christmas. And so where the advantage with the older looms is that it is very easy to produce a very small amount of fabric with very little waste. So whereas the setup is still the same, but we can do that. It's not a problem. In fact, something else that we've been working on recently, since we moved 3 years ago, we haven't had a single rubbish collection. What we've done is we've compiled into a variety of different bins, and we built a 2,500 litre compost bin. So a lot of we don't use any synthetic fibre, so everything is wool, linen or cotton. So anything that is cut from the looms or bits of excess yarn, that all goes in the compost bins with all the kitchen waste. And so far, it composts and composts and composts. And at some point, we will have to dig it out and go and spread it out somewhere. But just having that as a way, we know a lot of mills who have to have a huge problem. I mean, getting rid of all their waste, especially all the loom waste and the excess yarn. We don't have excess yarn. Everything gets kept, everything gets used. We've just started a project with something called the Camp Hill Community, which is this residential place for adults with learning difficulties. And we're now shipping them a lot of the loom waste that we can't use. Yeah. So this, just going back to this is the all the film work that we've been doing recently. So the top piece is actually a piece of paper that's printed out the size that they wanted it. That's the great thing about working with these people. They have no idea about textiles whatsoever, but they know exactly what they want. So they just print it out. We go, we want this. We want it this size. Okay, great. And so that is all woven with remnant yarns. The great thing about that is, so in England, there are a few companies that will go to all the big mills and buy up all the yarn that's left over from the big jobs. And then you can just go there, and it's wonderful because there's no delay. There's no this is in stock, that's not in stock, we can't have this, we can't have that. It's all just there. And a lot of these yarns don't necessarily fit together, but with a job like this, it works really well. So we try and use as much of that as we possibly can. And then occasionally we do get asked for working on hand weaving stuff. This is actually a frame that we built to make these gigantic, well, they weren't that big, I suppose, but big leather panels. This is all woven leather. So I think we made about 8 of these for wall hangings. Yeah. So this is, again, going back to the hand weaving element that we strangely not ever started with. We've sort of gone through a high-speed 10-year industrial revolution and then ended up going back to the hand weaving at the beginning, which is bizarre. So this is all our strips of leather. And then, there we go. How do I unshare? Right.
Thank you, Daniel.
Right. I'm just trying, how do I, can you see me?
Yeah, you should see a stop sharing button.
Ah, there it is. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. There we go. So panic. So yeah. So this studio here, this is where at the moment we're running the 100 jackets from. It's in a place called Trinity Buoy Wharf in London. So the jacket behind us, that's one we've just finished. I'm just gonna. This is what we had started working on in Lille. And you can actually see that the lining in the jacket is the lining straight off the loom. And these are now getting to a stage where we might think of producing them, but it's not really about I think you mentioned at the beginning,
when marketing people take control of what designers do and then run with it, we've always sort of, we have a completely vertical company. We're very sort of, a refusal to do that. And it's just sort of taking control and maintaining, doing it the way we want to be doing it. Yeah.
This is again, Danielle, I can always listen to you because you always have new things to tell us, also to share. And it gets more and more beautiful and complex and yeah, rich.
And prolific, you know, it's so prolific.
Mm.
You know, he's reaching Hollywood, space, Vivienne, everybody. It's just beyond imagination. It's incredible.
I think the thing is, so Beth and I, who work together, we've really tried to keep it, not too, like, try and keep it quite light, keep it fun, keep it interesting, not get too, well, try and not get pretentious at all, if you can help it. And just, you know, we had anything that we do that's educational from degree level down, we'll do for free. So since over lockdown, we've done quite a lot of, well, we've had to do the school visits like this, which has been, or the teacher will come and film us and go, hello, class 4 or whatever, here we go, this is a loom, and talk them through all that sort of thing. And that has become a huge focus for us, because if we've got all this amazing stuff, why would we not want to share that with people? Like, actually, no one really gets the opportunity to see how these work, and definitely not close hand. And, you know, no one's got as little disregard for safety as me. So you can get really close and really see what's going on. So, you know, it's really good. But,
and so, Daniel, if people want to commission a few yards from you or buy some of your fabric, how do they do that? They just reach out on the website?
The website's okay. The best thing is Instagram. Is go and have a look at our Instagram, London Cloth Co. We're about to sort the website out, a bit out of date now. But yes, just direct message us or drop us an email. And yeah, we are in this site in Trinity Boy Wharf in London for the next, up until the end of September. So we'll be open most weekends and probably Fridays for people to come and visit, come and see what we're doing. And then we'll be making once we've got more of the jackets finished, we'll actually be making a video. We'll have, and we couldn't do this because of lockdown, obviously. We've got 8 people that are supposed to be in here, weaving, sewing, cutting, everything. So I think what we'll probably do is run that as a display once or twice and film it and make a little film about it.
Mm.
Perfect. Okay, well, I look forward to visiting next time I'm allowed into the UK.
I know, right? Gosh.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
So great to see you. The public is raving about your presentation, so check the chat box.